From Relay, this is Upgrade episode 553 for March the 3rd, 2025. I, of course, as always, am one of your hosts, Jason Snell. And of course, we are in a weird time now where I am taking the lead instead of Myke Hurley for lots of reasons already explained. But I'm very happy to introduce to you now our very special guest for this very special episode of Upgrade. It's Myke Hurley. Hi, Myke.
Well, it's what a pleasure to be here. I've always loved this show, Jason, and I'm just so happy that you gave me the call now that Myke's out to bring me in.
Isn't it weird being on a podcast that you listen to so long? Oh,
it's particularly weird to be the guest in this environment. It's very strange to me. This is an episode out of time. We recorded this episode before my paternity leave.
Yes.
Actually, on my birthday.
Yes, happy birthday. It's January in the past, but it's March in the future. We just jumped.
Why are we doing this, Jason? Why is this happening? Can you explain?
I have a vacation scheduled, and it would normally, and it's Wednesday to Wednesday, so it's really impossible to record Upgrade in a not an out of time episode. And normally I would have said, Myke, you take that one, but you can't take it either. And so I had the thought, well, if we're going to do an episode out of time, why don't you and I do an episode out of time and then just drop it in? So a little bonus Myke for everybody right now.
You love it. If there's the people that are missing me, although I've really only been gone like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I know.
Again, I don't know. I don't know when.
Don't get used to it. Really, there are no extra episodes out of time for you to get. So it's an episode out of time. It's nice.
But because of that, we're doing something fun today, Jason, aren't we? What are we doing?
We are doing something called the most important Apple products, or if you would like to call it the Apple Monument. That's another concept. We're still working on it. The idea here is we are going to discuss the creation of, I would say, an entirely fictional monument to Apple products that have, I would say, I don't even want to describe it. It would have an impact, are important in some way that like the Baseball Hall of Fame, which has rules, but nobody seems to follow the rules about who gets in. Everybody's got their own definition for what a Hall of Famer is. And this is what we're going for here. And the key here is this is not something where we're inducting 5 things a year or something like that. This is an exercise in which we have to propose specific Apple products, and at the end, only 5 will be allowed to appear on the monument because there is limited space on the statue or in the painting or whatever this fictional
There's only
thing
so
is.
Much marble that the sculptor can use.
That's exactly right. The tree is only that large. Anyway, so we're going to pick 5. We're going to make something that is kind of like a draft, but it's really just our kind of nominations for what might be on the monument, and then we will make a final list of items. It's the sort of thing you might do for a podcast where you're unaware of news events for the previous 5 weeks.
This has been a topic that I've had in my notes for a long time, and was originally thinking it would be a summer of fun. But I thought when this was happening, I was like, I've been sitting on this idea, so I'm happy that we can do it. And the thing that Jason mentioned that I like is we haven't discussed the criteria. So I am expecting that both of us will be bringing products with our own criteria set, which I like.
Indeed.
That's like, so the first portion of the show is just us talking about the products. Here's a question for you.
Yeah.
So, I'm assuming we're probably going to be bringing products from categories. Do we want to just go like higgledy-piggledy here with this?
I want this episode to be as higgledy-piggledy as possible.
Okay. And so, for me, I think what I want to do is based on our document, I'm going to have the first pick here in this list.
Yes. It's funny. It's not a draft. It's not a draft in the sense that this is a collaborative process. We're going to nominate. We may agree or disagree, but it doesn't matter. At the end, we will then need to agree on 5 nominated by anybody. It doesn't really matter. And I'm sure we'll agree on a bunch of things, and then we'll disagree on a bunch of things. But it's a good exercise. And with that, Myke, maybe it's time for you to pick one.
So for me, I think probably my basic rubric here is some level of notoriety, right? Is what I'm going
Well,
for.
I mean, if we're putting this on a statue, it really ought to have, or in a painting, or in a museum, it really ought to have some notoriety. Yeah.
And I feel like there are the obvious items, and I'm sure we will get to those, but I have some that I want to make sure are at least they're at least spoken about, right? So my first important Apple product is the Apple Watch Edition, the original one, the gold one.
Wow.
That cost between $10,000 to $17,000 because I think that this very specific product is actually quite important because I mean the original Apple Watch important and will be important to history. But I think I believe as we look back in time, this very specific product is going to be seen as an important moment in Apple's history because if you were to believe that book that I like and you don't like, what is it called? After Steve? Is that the book? The
Yeah,
Trip
that's
Mickle book?
probably yeah, sure.
This was essentially this product was like them trying to placate Johnny, like give him kind of what
Hmm.
he wanted. And I think that that was maybe a point which some people would say like was a bad time for Apple, like when they were just giving Johnny what he wanted. But I see it as a really, if you kind of take a bigger view at that, this was kind of when Johnny was done, like he didn't want to do this anymore, and so they were
Yeah.
trying to make him feel better. And I think that Johnny leaving Apple has made an impact and will continue to make an impact. It may be wholly good, it may be wholly bad. I think we're too close to it still to know, but I think that this very specific product was something that should never have happened for multiple reasons, and I
Mm.
think was actually very embarrassing for Apple in
Mm.
the long run. And so I
Hmm.
wanted to at least put it up here as like I just want it mentioned and in the conversation. It's not going to make it to the monument, but I
No.
wanted to speak about it.
Yeah, again, there's no way. First off, we don't have enough gold to to put this on the monument. Isn't that an Apple Watch? No, it's made of gold. Oh, well, it is. Yeah, it simultaneously. It was to placate Johnny, right? I think we could all
Mm-hmm.
say there were a lot. And I don't know how many of these are actually true, but I suspect many of them are. It feels like there were a lot of decisions made by Apple in the era after Steve died that were to placate Johnny because, and I know we talked about this on Upgrade before, if you're trying to set a message of stability to the market after this perception that the guy responsible for all of Apple's success is gone.
Yeah.
One of the ways you do that is you bring in the people who are close to him, like Johnny Ive, and you hold them close. And if Johnny just left after Steve died, it would be an incredible. I think they feared what a black eye that would do to the perception of Apple.
Yeah.
But ironically, the reverse, I think, is true, which is in order to keep him high profile and keep him engaged and keep him around, they gave him more responsibility and gave him more weight in decision making. And as a result, in the 2010s, you see Apple make a lot of decisions that are kind of not practical and don't
Yeah.
make the products better. And there are lots of examples of those. But this is an interesting example where, yeah, the like the Vision Pro, I would argue, the Apple Watch was miscalculated at the beginning because of some influences by designers like Johnny Ive, and then it took years to kind of unravel it from that and make it more of what it should have been from the beginning. And I feel like Vision Pro is going down the same path, honestly.
Yeah. Different. Well, I guess this is the thing we can never really truly know, right? Like
We don't know. We don't know, but
there is
it
no.
certainly
I
feels like
mean,
the Vision
Johnny's
Pro is
influence on the
scarred a
Vision
little
Pro.
bit by some of those high design decisions about a product. Like, oh, we must have a screen on the outside, and we must have it be metallic, and all these things. Is like, did you really need that? But
I mean, it could be the same thing though, because some reporting says that Johnny guided some of those early decisions, right? And so like
yeah, Yeah.
I think like the guy was Steve Jobs' protege, and it said that it needed the pair of them to truly do good work. But like I think I am a noted Johnny Ive apologist. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that this was obviously a strange time in his career, like the Apple Watch especially, because again, like if the reporting is to be believed, Apple was doing the best they could with a product that could not handle it. I mean, we saw it
Yeah.
though, right? Like the Apple Watch Series 0 as it became retconned
Yes.
in,
Right.
that was a bad product. Like it had a lot of promise, so it was interesting. Like I would actually say now the original Apple Watch was a worse product than the Vision Pro,
Oh yeah.
because the
Totally.
Vision Pro actually works.
Yeah.
There's just things about it that don't work,
Yeah.
but like with the way that the apps were communicated from the watch and like how slow everything was, it was a not good product, and I think
Right.
they were trying their best at that time. So,
I just a word about being a Johnny Ive apologist. Johnny Ive's a brilliant designer. I think the
mm-hmm.
misunderstanding there, and as I just said, I understand why Apple did it. But the misunderstanding there is Johnny Ive was a brilliant designer who was working with a product person, Steve Jobs, who had incredible taste and could take what was great about Johnny Ive and also sort of stomp on the stuff that didn't make sense and that didn't work for a product. And
Mm-hmm.
after Steve was gone, I feel like what happened is Johnny was sort of given more free reign. And really, that is not the dynamic that you want. And it's not really even his fault. Also, I think he was burned out and was bored
Yeah.
and was trying stuff. But like, you need somebody to say no to Johnny Ive. And in that position in the 2010s, was anybody willing to say no to Johnny Ive?
No.
But Steve was. Anyway, we've spent a lot of time talking about a product that's not going to make it on the monument.
I think that we're going to find that to be the rest of this episode, but
It could
you're
be.
up.
We might end up with no monument at the end. Oh, no. No, it's just going to be a couple of iPod socks, and that's it. All right.
Uh-huh.
Let me make my proposal. I am going to put the original iPod up for consideration.
Interesting.
Original
Okay.
iPod. It's got the classic click wheel. It's got that look. It is bulky, but it is representative of one of the most important products in Apple history. It is the product that made people like Apple as a brand again. Where they were perceived as a weird outlying company and kind of like falling away from, like, their computers were not compatible, all those things. And then the iPod came out and people wanted it and they had to have it. And I would argue that it's got an iconic shape that is recognizable as an iPod. Even
Mm.
on our monument, we could pick different models of iPod, but I'm just going for the original iPod. It is that rectangle with the screen and the circle below it, and we could put some earbuds coming out of it. We'll see
Yeah.
what the sculptor or painter or whatever says, but I feel like a super defining product for a period of Apple's existence that also changed the company.
So the original iPod was the iPod where it had the click wheel. I mean, it physically moved
It
if I
did.
remember correctly,
It
but it
did.
also had the circular buttons around the outside. This one you could not. It wasn't until the iPod Photo where the click wheel actually became a clicking wheel, as
Became
opposed
also
to just a
the
scroll wheel.
buttons. Yes, that's
Yeah.
true. They struggled with that, where they put the horizontal touch buttons that were bad.
Terrible. They were so bad.
Um,
It was
eh,
third gen iPod, bad iPod.
bad iPod. So I just, yeah, you could pick others. This, yeah, they had the controls around the outside of the ring, and it spun. Which they, in the second gen, they made it more like a trackpad. But the first gen, it spun. But it doesn't. I mean, I'm not thinking about like these being functional because it's going to be in a monument. I'm thinking more
Yeah.
about like the classic silhouette. It's got that. It's got a bunch of iconic aspects to it. The circle, the screen. It doesn't need a working FireWire port on top either. It's
Sure.
fine. I feel like this is one of those iconic Apple products that should be considered for the monument.
I would like to carry this conversation on by making another pick.
Okay.
Um, I cannot argue with the original iPod or like whatever it ends up being, and maybe it ends up being like if we were to think of the iconic shape, like it might be like the iPod Photo or the iPod Video, right? That
Right.
really ended up like in its final form. But if we're talking
Sure.
about, from my perspective, a notable important product, I would go with the iPod Mini. because
Hmm.
I think the iPod Mini, at least from my recollection of history as the person at the time, the iPod Mini was the product that I think really opened the iPod up to the world. It
Hmm.
was super small, bright colors, and then, they were able to get 4 gigabytes in that tiny little thing. You could clip it to your belt, and you had the
Mm-hmm.
white earbuds. Like, this was my first iPod. It was a pink
Mm-hmm.
iPod Mini, which I still have actually. And I really think the iPod Mini. I mean, and it was followed by other iPods, right? Like the Nano. I think just opened it up even further. But I think this was where fun was brought into the iPod line, and I think really kind of helped it proliferate out into the world at a bigger degree even than the original iPod. But I would struggle to argue with just iPod Classic as being the one on the
Right.
monument. But I feel like I've got to throw out some love to the iPod Mini because I really think that it was very, very influential.
I think that's fair. I think that it's a my argument for the original iPod is mostly that classic shape. I think is a really pleasing kind of proportion, and the iPod Mini is a little taller and a little skinnier,
Mm-hmm.
and a little rounder. And while that made it an interesting and fun product, I feel like the original iPod maybe just sort of says iPod more, but like
I
we're
agree
dealing
with
with
you.
details here. It is a fun product that yes, it did bring it to the masses, and then of course famously was then immediately killed and replaced by the iPod Nano, um,
What did it say?
because
Like it's the most popular iPod ever, or the most popular MP3 player in the world.
yeah,
And so, what are we going to do? We're going to kill it, or we're going to
yeah,
replace it. Is that something? That's the line. I
yeah.
think so good,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
good.
because they replaced it with a flash-based Nano, and that made all the difference. Because the whole point of the iPod Mini was that it was smaller, and so they could make it even smaller by making the flash-based Nano. And the original iPod, you're right, it is one of those things that happens sometimes where it's like the one being shown here is actually this very particular model or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that might happen with the iPod, where we go to the designer of the statue or the painting or again whatever this monument is, and they say which iPod should it be. If we decide an iPod is going to go on there, maybe in the end it is the iPod Classic or something that's a little more refined version, because that's what they did, right? They kept refining that silhouette of the iPod, and it still always had the circle at the bottom and the screen at the
Mm-hmm.
top, and it was a rectangle, and that's the most important thing, I think.
I think if
Okay.
if this was a color product, it would have to be white, though.
I think you're
In my
right.
opinion, it would
I
have to
agree.
be white.
I think that's the iconic. Again, that's the iconic iPod.
Because
Um,
I never liked that about the classic that they were aluminium on the front. I didn't like that.
right,
I
right,
liked it when
right.
they were like
Yeah,
it was white plastic. And so like for
that's the
me,
fundamental.
one that I have on my list, but I will not pick it now because there is no point doing this. Is the iPod Video. Like that was such a, for me, a really important product. But it also, again, it built on the foundation of the iPod. They made the screen a bit bigger. It's full color. You could watch video on it. I did. I used to watch
Hmm.
video podcasts
Yeah, yeah.
on my iPod Video. Like that one was like super great, and I feel like something like that, or the kind of the fourth generation onwards, something in that realm would be what would go on our monument.
Mm. All right, with my next nomination, I'm going to suggest the original Mac from
Okay.
1984.
Yep.
Classic Mac silhouette. It is, and it ended up on every Mac after that for a long time. When you turned it on, you would get the little Happy Mac, and it's that Mac. It's that shape. It's that little, again, like an iPod. It's an iconic shape. And I think that if we're thinking about monuments, I keep coming back to like what is this object shaped like and how is it going to, so it's got to tell a story about like an important part of Apple, but it's also got to be kind of recognizable and relevant and hopefully kind of pleasing. And I think the original Mac is pleasing. I mean, I could argue about the shape of some other, Macs, compact Macs of that early era. It could be, this is the Mac user Eddie Award statue, and then ultimately the Macworld Eddie Award statue, was originally an original Mac, and they updated it to make it an SE, or maybe it was a classic, and it remained that for the rest of time. So there are lots of different classic compact Macs on there. It doesn't have to actually be the original Mac, but it's got the little disk drive slot and the little screen, and it's just that cute little compact shape. says Macintosh to me.
I'm gonna make a pick here so we can talk about this because
Okay.
I think the representation. If we were to say we're gonna have a Mac on this monument,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if that's the way we end up doing this, because who knows? We could end up with just 5 Macs. Like we don't. I
Sure.
think picking a Mac will actually be the hardest thing to do,
Could be.
and I will throw out the MacBook Air, the original.
Oh,
I watched you typing in our document. You typed the letter I, which I think you
yeah.
thought I was going to go in a different direction.
I did.
I think that the MacBook Air, which became, the one with a little flippy down door, which then just became the MacBook Air, which then became the M1 MacBook Air, like that whole design, it was so prevalent and lasted for so long. I mean, we were just talking about this a little while ago about how, people bemoan it when it's gone. And we heard from a lot of, I heard from a lot of listeners anyway, who were saying that they love their wedge-shaped MacBook Air.
Sure.
I think it's probably the most staying power a format has had. Like off the top of my head, like essentially an unchanged design. Like even the iMac, as it grew up from the G4 into what we have now, I think changed more than the MacBook Air did in that time. Like that design, it lost the flippy down door and then the
Yep.
screen got a bit bigger. Other than that, I don't think it changed like really at all
Yeah.
throughout its
That's
entire life.
The second generation Air basically remained the same through the with basically very little change through the
Yeah.
M1.
The 11 got dropped, didn't it, at some point?
Yes, they added the 11 and dropped it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the 11-inch MacBook Air, I mean, come on, you kidding me? Like, what an incredible computer.
Love that computer.
I think it would be difficult, not impossible, but I think that it is difficult to argue against the importance and the influence of the MacBook Air. Apple tried to get rid of it multiple times but couldn't because their customers disagreed.
It's true. When it went Retina, there was no 11, and it was sad. But like it went Retina after it had basically been discontinued, it remained around, but it had not been updated. And they finally were like, "All right, here's your Retina MacBook Air," because they just couldn't. They were still selling them. They're trying to get people to move to the MacBook Pro Retina or to the MacBook 12-inch.
Yep.
And people are like, nope, I just want that MacBook Air. And then I finally, all right, okay, fine, it's back.
And then today, we still have the MacBook Air, which like, doesn't really make any logical sense, right? There is nothing else in its class. There isn't a regular MacBook that this one is thinner or lighter than.
Yeah, it's just
like,
the Pro.
Now, the Air branding is in other areas now.
It's true. Areas.
Because this product is so loved that they have an iPad called the Air. We're expecting an iPhone called the Air. Like, it means something to people.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. It's very meaningful. I have some aesthetic questions.
Sure.
About the MacBook Air and laptops in general for the monument. Maybe I'll save those for later. But there's a question of how would you depict this? And would it be open or would it be closed? Because I feel like an open laptop is kind of awkward, and a closed laptop is more an iconic shape, but is also like just a rectangle.
I think for the purposes of allowing us to have this conversation fully, let's set the parameters for the monument. I'm going to say it is a statue.
It's a statue, yeah.
It's a statue. Okay. So if it's a statue, I think what I would want is open, but with the logo facing you. So you could go around to the back of the statue and see the rest of the laptop. But that like it should be an open laptop so you can see that it's an open laptop. But I think that is the iconic thing. And that goes back and that represents all Macs, right? Up to, from a certain point where they actually put the logo out the right way. But that it represents a long time of laptops in Apple Mac history. But yeah, for me, it would be the MacBook Air.
Nice. Okay. Well, then I will just put on the pile the iMac G3.
Yeah. I was struggling. So I got my little list here. And I actually did have the G3 iMac above the MacBook Air. But then when it came to talking about it, it's like, I think I've got to throw the Air in there. But the G3, I mean, I got in my notes here, I wrote, it made Apple cool again. and
Yeah,
set them on the path that will become the iPod. Without the iMac G3, there's no iPod. And without the iPod, there's no iPhone.
exactly. It's all part of that comeback story. I it's funny that we've talked a lot about how the iMac G4 is the fundamental, like maybe the most beautiful Mac ever made.
Yeah.
And I agree. And I could nominate it too, and maybe I will because it is so beautiful. The with the floating screen on the arm. But if we're representing the best of Apple design, really, as well as the impact, the G3, it looks a little weird now because it's kind of bulbous because it's got the whole CRT in it and all that. But it is harkening back to the original Mac, and it is it is that product that helped save Apple, and it does have an unmistakable silhouette, right? You see it and you're like, oh, it's that iMac G3. And so it's an important product. I'm not sure in the long run if it's better than a better choice than a MacBook Air or an original iMac, but it is an important product with a powerful, recognizable silhouette, which is why I wanted to mention it.
This is a difficult one. Um, because it is interesting now. I think design has come back around. Like where we are today in 2025, I think we're back with the iMac G3 again,
Mm.
which like from part of it is the fonts that Apple were using at that point. I don't know if you know the name of it, but like the serif font that they were using. I mean, there are versions of this now
It's
everywhere.
Apple. Isn't that Apple Garamond? I think they were using
That's
Garamond before they
Yeah,
changed
that
it.
sounds right. But like that style, that like the way that Garamond looks, if you find a startup today, they're using a font that looks like this. Like they are so prevalent. But just also just like the general color, where people want the color, the see through, like the clear, people like
Sure,
that. And even I agree with what you're saying about the bulbousness of the G3, but it still looks cool.
it does.
Still, it looks cool,
It's
and
a
that is
it's an
not
interesting object. It really is an
it's
interesting
not just the
object.
retroness of it, right? Like, because you look at something like the iBook, that doesn't look cool anymore.
The toilet seat.
Yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't.
and it has a lot of the same ideas to it. Or like, you could like the Power Mac G3.
Mhm. Sure.
It's not cool.
You're
Like,
taking all my
the,
jokes. These are all my jokes. It's like what? It's a blue and white Power Mac G3. Let's get the Molar Mac in there. Oh, on the monument, boy. That's why I didn't invite Stephen Hackett to this discussion. That's why.
yeah, it would be all just like, let me tell you about this
Weird
performer. Let me
Macs.
tell you about that performer.
It'd be
But
like
like,
a human centipede of Macs. It would be disgusting, and you'd have to look away. Like,
yeah.
no, no, I don't want to see it. No, Performas, no.
But like, I just think that the G3, it it is its coolness and its design is kind of never ending. Like we work at Qualtrics Brand, we work with a couple of branding designers, and they're from Australia, and they're, I don't know, probably like 10 years younger than me, maybe more. They were not around or really aware of the G3,
Mm-hmm.
but we were having a conversation recently, and they brought up how cool it looked. So like, I don't even think it's like a
There you go.
nostalgia thing. It's
That's
not just
nice.
like, oh, you were
Good to
there at
hear.
the time. No,
Mm,
people just love the way this thing looks.
that's cool.
And from an important, see, and again, it's like, what is importance? This product is really important. Like,
It is. It
we don't
is.
have Apple today without the G3, right?
It is. It's super relevant. I think all the products that we've mentioned so far, except the Apple Watch edition, could be said
I
at
just
least a
had to
little
get
bit.
it in
But
there,
yeah,
man.
I
I
know. I
needed it.
know.
I
Well, no, you
needed it in
started us
there.
off with a bang. Yeah. Okay. This is gonna be a tough decision for this for our monument. But you have any other nominees? What do you have next?
I mean, there's an elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so complicated.
I
Like,
know.
even because I could just keep going to avoid it.
I
Like it
that's
is.
been my strategy.
I think I'm gonna avoid it a little bit longer.
Okay.
Um, and I'm actually, so okay. I was gonna pick AirPods at this point, but I'm changing that
Okay.
to the white earbuds.
Hmm.
So like the white earbuds, I guess the iPod earbuds. I don't even, I because this has just popped into my mind now. Because like now I'm back in like I'm thinking further back, right? Because the AirPods look the way they do because of earpods, right? That came before those.
Yes.
Came before those was the white earbud that
Yes.
was part of the iPod, and then also the
Mm-hmm.
iPhone. They again were like there are elements, there are products that enabled the Apple we have today, and they
Mm-hmm.
are the iPod, they are the iMac G3, and they are the white earbuds, because you were making a statement whether you liked it or not, and people wanted these things. If you could have used any earbuds with most of your products, you could use any earbuds, but the white earbuds were a fashion statement for a long time. So I'm gonna throw those out there. I mean, I would also put AirPods, but I just while I'm thinking retro, I'm gonna throw the white earbuds out there as important in the history of Apple.
All right. Well, I am going to rip the Band-Aid off.
Okay.
White earbuds also we're gonna put a little pin in that one because you might be able to depict them with the original iPod. Hmm?
That's a good call. Yeah, we
Right?
can get a twofer there.
You slide them in there.
Every set of rules needs loopholes, and that is the
Ex-
loophole.
yeah, that's right. I'm gonna pick the iPhone 5.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Why this one?
Um, so the iPhone 5 has the flat side brawn razor kind of design language of the iPhone 4, but it's taller, and I think I
Mm-hmm.
find that shape a little more pleasing. I had a black iPhone 5 and it was the best. It was so awesome. And I feel like if you're going to depict the iPhone, maybe you depict an early iPhone design where it's got the button on it below the screen. And if you're doing that, you
Hmm.
could pick the original. You could, and I could see the argument for picking the original is super important, but also the original is a one off, and they never really go back there. They made the plastic version of it, which was the 3GS and the 3G. And then they went to the 4, which was this style, and that was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then they shifted to the iPhone 10. So what was it? 6, 7? Is it 6, 7, 8 that have the rounded edges that are
Yeah,
more
six,
like
seven, eight.
bars of soap? 6, 7,
Yeah,
8.
well, six S, seven S, and
Yes,
an eight.
right, right. So I think I prefer the flat-sided design to the bar of soap curved design, and that's why I picked the 5 is I think it's representative. Like I think the original and the 3G and 3GS are interesting historically. I love the original iPhone, but it is from a design perspective, it's what they could ship. Whereas I think 4 and 5 come the to being closest for a while anyway to being sort of what they wanted the iPhone to be. I could also maybe argue that like the iPhone 10 is
Yeah.
is literally what Johnny Ive wanted to ship, but I really like the flat-sided design. So I feel like if it's not the iPhone 5, I have to go up to like the iPhone 13.
Okay.
And another kind of like flat-sided, but in that case buttonless. And I don't know. I think just like with the original iPod, having the circular item down at the bottom is sort of iconic with Apple. So I'm gonna split the difference and say iPhone 5. I don't feel super strong about it, but if I have to pick one, I could go with a classic. I could go with a later model, like a 10 or a 14 or something like that. But why not iPhone 5?
I want to correct myself. There was no iPhone 7S,
Okay,
which is a funny thing that they did.
dodged a
They went
bullet
from
there.
7 to 8, but the 8 was. Why didn't they just call the 8 the 7S? Anyway, so I had in my notes, for similar reasons, the iPhone 5S, but from an. So again, this is like if we're
Ah,
imagining it as a statue, it doesn't make a difference between the 5 and the 5S. But I
right.
put the 5S down because it had Touch ID, right? Um, as like an important thing. But if you've just got something made of marble, it doesn't matter what one it is. You have made an interesting. There is something interesting about what you have chosen here for like what is the iconic iPhone.
Exactly. It's the 12, by the way. The 12 is when the flat side design came back. So I feel like flat side design is the way to go, and that maybe the
Yeah,
circle, the Touch ID button at the bottom, the home button, is
I think it
actually
has to be because
that one.
the 6 to the 8 bad time for iPhone design. The only good
Yeah,
thing was they made a big one, but the rounded was not that that I don't
it's
think
not
that
my
ever
favorite.
truly looked good. And I think people got tired of it very quickly in a way that even though I think we've sat with this flat edge design since the 12 for longer now, um,
Yes.
it isn't as tired looking. Like by the time we got to like 7S, it was like, oh god, please, Apple, change the design of this iPhone. Like I remember that being like a prevalent thing at the time. This is very complicated, right? Because
Yes.
we've mentioned the 5 and the 4. I mean,
Yeah. Right. I mean, the 4 is shorter, is all. And the 5 is a little bit taller. What makes why 5S and not 5?
I put Touch because I had Touch ID. I thought that was
Okay.
interesting, but
It adds
that
the
that
little
was in
metallic
a
ring around the circle. Okay, I mean that might be. It depends on sort of the materials that the sculptor uses here
yeah.
in our made up thing. It could be, the 5S.
Yeah,
I'm open. My love of the
we're
5
splitting
really was
hairs
that
on that one.
that great black iPhone 5, and I loved it. It's my Darth Vader phone. That was my favorite. That was my favorite for sure.
I mean, all right, I'm just gonna put original iPhone now, so
Okay,
it's on the list. Like,
sure.
I
It's
mean,
it. Yeah,
realistically, it's the most important product that Apple has ever made and will
it
probably
is.
ever make. I don't think they will ever, and I feel confident saying this. I do not believe Apple Inc. will ever make a product as important as the iPhone ever again.
I, I might go so far as to say no company currently constituted will ever make a product as important as the original iPhone. Maybe some new
I think
company
you're right.
will,
I think you're
in
right.
our
I mean, because
lifetimes anyway. In our lifetimes.
realistically, the company before this was Apple, and the company before that was also Apple, right? Of
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
iPod and the Mac. Of
yeah.
like,
And the smartphone. I mean, the smartphone is in many ways, at least so far, the culmination of the entire computer industry, and is the biggest, most impactful consumer product of our era, because
mhm.
we've gone from not having personal computers in the 70s to now 50 years later everybody's got a supercomputer tied into a global high-speed computer network in their pocket everywhere they go. Like, it's
Well,
huge.
here's
It's
a question for
transformative.
you:
Yeah.
is the iPhone more important than the PC? Like, if we're looking at in all of history, like we could say the Mac or the PC or whatever, just in general. Like, let's say the Mac as like the first true personal computer. Is the iPhone more important than the Mac?
Yes. That
Yeah, I
it's
think so
required
too.
by the PC. The computer is required to get to the smartphone, but the smartphone is more important because the smartphone reaches more people. More people use a smartphone than ever used a computer, and is used by them.
Yeah.
They use it, and they use the data, and they may use the phone, but they also use the data. I think the smartphone is it literally is the culmination of the entire. As somebody who came up as a computer person, a fan of computers, I first got my hands on a computer in, like, I don't know, fourth grade, something like that, and just was blown away by it. And it changed my life. It was a funny moment when the smartphone is growing, and sometime in the 2010s, where I had that realization that, oh, all of that was just a prelude to this. And maybe there's another thing to come. Maybe it goes into something that is you wear on your face or whatever. Like, we will see. But thus far, this seems to be the definitive product of this entire industry, and that has the biggest global impact.
You could live your life without a personal computer, right? You could have
And
lived your life.
many parts of the world, people don't
Yeah.
have computers. They just have phones.
I think modern society requires a smartphone,
Boy, it
and
does it ever.
the
Everything's got an
iPhone
app.
is the smartphone, right? And
It
there are now
started it.
many competitors, but
Sure.
what we consider the smartphone, or even what we consider a phone today,
Right.
it's the iPhone. That
Yeah.
is the one that began it,
Yeah.
and that's why I would put it here, even though
My
it might not be the most iconic look,
Yeah.
it's the most important
I
product,
think
I
that's the
think.
argument is aesthetics here because the original iPhone, it's kind of bodged together. It's got kind of bulbous kind of curves that I don't love. It's got the two-piece back that is not great. It's still metallic and when they went to plastic, I'm sure that really drove Johnny Ive batty because it they were cheaper. They felt cheap, and I know why they did it. They had to do it, but like the plastic backs were not as good. And as soon as they could, they got away from there. Right? They're like they skated away from there. But that early era, it was not great. And I feel like the 4 and the 5 is when they really kind of figured it out, and then they kind of went into a hole a little bit. So it really comes down to whether we want a representative. Uh, whether it matters more that it's the first or whether it matters more that it's the iPhone. And here's a beautiful iPhone design. Oh, well, I've really talked myself into a corner here, haven't I?
Yeah, yeah, you could say
What am
that.
I gonna pick next?
We
Boy.
could leave the iPhone for a little bit, right? Because like I have more iPhones. Although actually, before we move on, I'm just gonna throw
Mm,
them out there. We're not gonna pick them because I don't
okay.
think that. But so I have the iPhone 10,
Yes. Great.
maybe the iPhone 10 we would include. The
Mm-hmm.
6 Plus I think is important because it's the first big phone.
Mm-hmm.
But I even noted, and I mentioned already with the design outstayed its welcome.
Well, yeah. And I don't
And
think the
then,
sculpture is going to be actual size. So whatever iPhone we choose can probably be really big.
yeah,
Unless
we
the
have the
concept
iPhone.
is like it's a person holding all of these devices. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it's up to the sculptor, I guess.
Up to the sculptor. That's for their artistic
Uh-huh.
interpretation. I look forward to the fan art, by the way, that we're surely
Man.
undoubtedly going to get for this
I'm
episode, which
I,
I will respect.
I'm saying it now, and I don't know whether this will come to be, but I'm sort of thinking we might want to commission something. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
It's actually not a bad idea. We have the time.
Mm.
Maybe there will be
Mm-hmm.
something by the time
Mm-hmm.
this episode
Maybe.
is done.
Maybe.
Um, the iPhone 4 is important for so many reasons in history. Like it was the iPhone that leaked. It was the first Retina display.
Yeah.
It had the
And it
first gate.
sure, and it brought in the flat side design that I think
Yeah.
is the best design.
And then just a random one that I want to throw out there for kind of similar reasons, I think, to my gold Apple Watch is the iPhone 7 Plus. Um,
Okay.
it was the first phone that had a dual camera,
Hmm.
and it also took away the headphone jack.
Ah, yes. Ah, yes. If we don't want water ingress in our statue, we could pick the 7 Plus.
Uh-huh.
All right. I'm gonna. I don't know how I feel about this one, but I'm gonna put it out there. I'm going to propose uh AirPods. Let's say AirPods Pro
Okay.
in their case.
Oh, okay. So we're even going artistic here.
Well, like AirPods Pro is just like a thing. I mean, they could float in space, or if you just have the case, it's just a rectangle. But I'm thinking
Yep.
like, I think I'd like to. The idea that Apple, first off, AirPods in general, a very successful product that people don't talk about. A really great example of a category where there were already existing products that did it, and then Apple came in, and everybody went, "Oh my god!" And like Apple became wildly successful selling them, and other people still sell them, and they're successful, but not like Apple is successful. It really is like Apple just it's classic Apple move in all of those ways. And I can tell
Mm-hmm.
you, as somebody who has been wearing in-ear headphones for a couple of decades now, and has turned my nose up at Apple headphones, and it's like they're just not good. They don't sound good. I don't like them. The earbuds, I never liked them. I was so skeptical of the original AirPods, and they were really good. And then they added noise canceling in the AirPods Pro, and they're in their canal phones, and they are spectacularly good to the point now where I don't use my in-ear headphones for anything but podcasting. Everything else, I just use AirPods Pro. And then the fact that they have this charging case, which could have been like super fiddly and weird, but instead I think generally is just a very simple way to have that extra battery life
Yep.
and a place to hold them, because you got to put them somewhere or you're going to lose them. And the fact that they kind of like did that as a package, and that it works as well as it does, I think it's a really great design. I
Yeah.
think I would probably pick the AirPods Pro shape of the case that's a little bit wider, but it could be the standard AirPods and that would be fine too. But I think AirPods in their case of some kind, um, that would be what I would propose. I think
I
an
think AirPods
accessory.
Pro is the right pick. Like, because AirPods, like the original AirPods, just super awkward design. Stems were too long. And Apple has come to refine the AirPods that we have today to look more like the AirPods Pro. I think that is, again, it's like we got to the better version, right? So, like, I think back to the iPod. Well, really, the iPod Photo, the iPod Video, that is, or even like what we're saying about the iPhone, potentially depending on what one we go with, like they get to where they want to be, as opposed to like the original AirPods, which were super weird looking. I mean, but it was actually quite an achievement of how good a product they were that people wanted to wear those, because they were weird looking. They were like with
Mm-hmm.
the stems that came down. That was it really did look
Yeah.
like somebody just came around and cut the cables off of your
Yeah.
earbuds. When
Right.
now they are much more sleek and a much better design, and that came with the AirPods Pro. I'm gonna go with the iPad, the original iPad.
All right.
And the reason I will go with the original iPad is the price.
Hmm.
$499, which was half of what everybody thought it was going to be. It's maybe the only time in history where Apple has surprised us with a significantly cheaper price than what we expected a product to be. I mean, everybody thought there was no way they make a tablet for less than $1,000. Right? That
Mm-hmm.
that was the expectation at the time. Like, the iPad is a complicated product, and if I'm being completely honest with myself, I think I would struggle to argue its place on this monument just in general as a product
Mm-hmm.
category. I think it would be difficult. I mean, we haven't gotten to the end yet. There are complete other categories we've not given a realistic representation to. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
looking at you, Apple Watch Edition Series Zero.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the original iPad is a good product. It was the time when people have been most excited about the iPad en masse, right? It's hard to. I think it's easy to forget just how successful the iPad was at the beginning. They sold so many of them, so for a long time. And the App Store was rich and vibrant, but look, the story old as time now at this point. Just the
Mm-hmm.
iPad did not live up to its potential and still doesn't. But at the beginning, I mean, there was the hey, this is a big iPhone thing. But while people said that negatively, at that point in 2010, that was actually a good thing. Like, we loved the iPhone. The iPhone was small. Having access to the App Store
On a big screen.
on a big screen
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
really important
Yeah. I agree.
then.
I agree. I'm gonna counter here,
Okay.
and this is I like your suggestion of the original iPad. I think my counter is largely about design.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, okay, so here's a funny thing. One of the things that I love about the original iPad is its design. It's look, it gets bulbous at the back. It has the flat sides, and then they just kind of keep going out. So it wants you to think that it's got flat sides and that's the whole end, but it keeps going because there's just too
Made it
much.
comfortable to hold, though, right?
It did. It
Yeah.
did. Um, it's a good design. I didn't love the future iPad designs that became more, instead of as has been made clear already, I kind of like the flat side look for a
Yeah.
device and not the kind of tapered design. And the
Yeah.
iPad did the tapered design for a very, very long time. Um, and the button on the iPad is iconic, the original iPad. And I've said before, like Touch ID, home button kind of stuff feels very iconic, just like the click wheel and this, feels iconic on the iPod. But I'm going to put it out there that I think as a representation of the platonic ideal of an iPad, I'm going to say the M4 iPad Pro,
Hmm.
the current iPad Pro, because it is
Bold.
thin and a perfect flat-sided rectangular slab. I would say the that is that's the Johnny Ive iPad. It's very thin, it's featureless. I mean, it is very Johnny in that way. And so I think it could be potentially a good representative of the iPad without feeling because the original iPad, I mean, it did do really well. It did a lot of people bought that original iPad. But I think the M4 iPad Pro is in some ways kind of a refinement of that same design in terms of being, flat sided and it's not bulbous on the back. It's super flat and thin.
Yeah, it's complicated, right, to pick something so current. Um,
Mm-hmm. I know,
but it
I know,
it
but there I
really
am. I'm a
it's what
complex
the
guy,
iPad. This is clearly what the iPad should have always been, which is like
but couldn't.
essentially, it is literally as thin and light as you can make it, right? Like that's
Yeah.
clearly what they're going for with the M4 iPad Pro, right?
Yep.
How thin and how light can this product be? Because that gets it closest to what I mean. We keep invoking his name, but Steve Jobs is like, you're just holding a piece of glass.
That's right. That's right.
That's what
Which
the
is what
M4 iPad Pro feels like.
and I could make that argument for modern iPhones. Honestly, one of the reasons that I suggested the iPhone 5 instead of a modern iPhone is the camera bump. The camera sensor in the back is so ugly, and the iPhone 5 it was less. It was just like a little
Yep.
camera. And,
Yep.
and honestly, I think that's the difference. And yes, the iPad also has a camera bump, so you could go with the original iPad there. I like I just it is there's something about that M4 iPad Pro I think that is um it, again, it's so expensive and all those other things, but like from a design standpoint, it being like a perfect iPad. You could say that about honestly the modern iPad Air is like that too, but something like that.
Okay. Um, Important, I don't know, but potentially iconic is the Vision Pro. I mean, it is what it is, right? But like, I think there are few products in Apple's modern history that are so clearly the thing they, they want to make for good or ill
Yeah.
from a visual perspective. Like, it's so clearly an Apple product. It,
Mm-hmm.
it is it is almost it's almost like someone was walking around and picking up pieces, like it has a crown on it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's kind of got like a Apple Watch band kind of thing around the back of it. It like looks like a bunch of bands that they make. It's like, oh, we're going to use the glass and the aluminium from the iPhone, and it's really got like so many component pieces to what put this thing together is just stuff Apple makes. Even on the inside, like it has essentially a Mac chip on the inside of the thing, right? And then obviously another. It has every possible camera you could put on something. I mean, it is. If this thing is ever considered, if the original Vision Pro in the future is ever considered important, I think it is important for maybe the wrong reasons.
Hmm.
Um, and in like there is a possibility where Vision Pro 4 is like it's taken over the world, but people would look back at the Vision Pro, the original one, and be like, you could see where they were going, but it needed this, it needed that, and then it eventually gets to where they want it to be. Like in the same way that like the original iPod, right? I keep coming back to this, but like I do think that there is a good analog there of like you can see what they were going for, and it was really cool. I mean, it did have a bigger impact, but it needed much more refinement to get it to the point where this thing works the way exactly as it should. right? Like it made so much sense to not have these extra buttons on the thing. It made so much sense for there to not be an actual spinning disc inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it kind of gets to that point. And I think there is a path where the Vision Pro takes its own thing. You don't need that screen on the front. It doesn't need to be so heavy, right? Like there are many things just from a physical perspective where we get to like, oh, it could do with supporting controllers so you can do different things with
Mm-hmm.
it,
Sure.
like it gets to a point, right? Like, oh, it needs to have Apple Intelligence so you can just talk to it and it will do things for you, so you haven't got to be tapping and pinching all the time. Like there are a lot of things that this product could have,
Sure.
but I wanted to throw it out there because it is what it is.
Yeah. The danger is we put it on the statue, and in 5 years they're like, "What is this? A monument to Apple's hubris that they put the
Yes.
Vision Pro on it?" That's the
Yeah.
danger, because we're
But
making this
again, like
for
I feel it's similar to why I picked
posterity.
the gold Apple Watch, right? It's like
Yeah.
that
All
it
right.
says something
It
about
does
the
say something
company
about
that they
Apple.
did this.
It is. Then this is going to be Jason and Mike's controversial Apple monument if we choose
Can
that.
you, what can we pick? We pick the gold Apple Watch, the Vision Pro, what like the iPhone 8, and
Yeah, and some iPod socks.
mm-hmm.
Um, well, just wait, because I'm going to pick the original Mac mouse. Now, maybe like with earbuds, we can sneak it in with the iPod. Maybe we can sneak this in with the original Mac if we use it. But I want to mention an accessory. The original Mac mouse is representative of the fact that this is the original graphical interface. This is when the mouse was introduced to the world, really. I know it existed a long time before that, but this is when everybody suddenly understood what a mouse was. I think that it's an interesting product ergonomically. It's got a recognizable shape. And what's also fun about it is that it's the one button mouse, because that was a choice Apple made to simplify uh, mouse concepts that had multiple buttons. And of course, then everybody that followed Apple also decided to complicate it by adding more buttons. And Apple has sort of steadfastly refused to do a multi-button mouse. They have sort of like they do, but it doesn't, it's hidden and it's not really. And so anyway, that's my historical pitch for putting a mouse on a monument.
Yeah, I think
And that's a
I think
classic kids book. If you give a mouse a monument, anyway,
yeah, as I say, I think if this was to make it on, it would be with the Mac. Like if we put the
probably.
original Mac on there, we'd put this
Yeah,
on there too. I mean, if we're in peripheral land, I'm gonna throw in the Apple Pencil,
sure.
and I'm gonna put the original one in. you know, it the
Is
Apple
that a
Pencil.
official nomination for you? Should I put that down as
Yeah,
your
let's put
official
it on there.
nomination?
Why
Okay,
not?
Apple
We're in
Pencil.
this zone now. It legitimized a tool people really wanted the iPad to have, right?
Yeah.
Like there were so many styluses, and they were essentially just finger replacements, right? They did not
Yes.
do
Yes.
refined work, and
They couldn't really.
it did open up a new field, and legitimized a use of the iPad as a drawing tablet. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is a significant portion of professional iPad use is artists and illustrators who use this device to do their work. And it is, for many, the best device that you could use for this kind of work, for this kind of illustrative work. And so I think that they have definitely made this a smart, like a valid like use of the iPad. And the Apple Pencil, I mean, the original one is also a little bit notorious for its charging method, and I feel like I feel like if it was this on the statue, the cap would be lost. It would be on the ground somewhere, like there'd be like a little stone, little marble cap somewhere that's like fixed to the ground, and the little lightning port sticking out on the top.
All right, I'm going to close it out. Going to close the nominations out.
Oh, we're closing the nominations?
I think so. Or do you have more? I mean, we just got to the end of the list, but it's fine. We can. We'll.
I
This is going to be
think
my last one. This is going to be my last one. Then you can
I
do
think
whatever
I'll
you
be
want.
okay to move on, and that maybe Yeah, I want to make one more after you if you
Okay.
don't pick something that if you don't
Okay.
pick the thing I'm thinking
I
about.
picked the Power Mac G4 Cube. That's what I pick. I think
That
it's
is
already like
absolutely
a sculpture. It's
okay.
already a sculpture. It's already like a statue. It is a problematic computer, but a beautiful piece of art. And I think that you could build a giant Power Mac G4 Cube somewhere, and it would be a great art piece all on its own. And so I put it here.
It could be the base of the statue, even. I just want to put the Apple Watch Series 4 in here. I
Okay.
think the Apple Watch is an important enough product that it deserves to at least be in the consideration seriously.
All right.
And I think the Series 4 is where the Apple Watch kind of got out of its ugly duckling phase. I still
Mm-hmm.
think that it needs significant work. The Apple Watch is like a full redesign. I still believe that that is something that I would like to see them do one day. Um, but the Apple Watch Series 4, where the screen kind of really took over the shape of the watch, I think was a pretty important step
Mm.
in its product.
All right.
I think I have others on my list, but I think we can maybe keep those for Upgrade Plus because then I don't believe that there is any product on here that I think is important enough to knock off what could be R5.
Okay. Sounds good.
So it's deliberation time.
It
So we're
is.
gonna pick a list of 5 from the list that we have. Why don't you go first? For like making, because we're not picking it's not drafting this. We have to come to this agreement together. But do you want to
Right.
go first to elevating? We'd like try and pick one to elevate. And again, we can do a re-ranking. Like if we put something on this list, it doesn't have to stay on this list, right? Like we can shift them off, but we've got to start trying to make a some. We've got to try and pick some of these short lists to put them on the 5. I think.
Okay. I think the iPod has to be on.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I think the iPod has to be on. I think let's do it this way. I think an iPhone has to be on,
absolutely.
and I think a Mac needs to be on.
Yeah,
And then beyond that, we actually have 2 slots
yeah.
for other things, whether it's an iPad, Apple Watch, other Macs, other
Over iPhone.
iPhones, whatever. I my argument is going to be that we only need one iPod, and that I think we only
Yes.
need one iPhone because they're just they're so similar. Whereas
Yeah.
at least with Mac industrial design, it's not only is it a much older product. I also, by the way, because people are going to say this, I didn't nominate the Apple II or the Apple IIe or the Apple IIc. They are interesting, but I don't think that they're that attractive. I mean,
You can't argue that that is more important than the Mac, right? I don't
yeah, but
think you. I
if
don't
we're
think you
talking
can
about
make that.
Apple design, like okay, I'll just it's not going on the monument probably, but I'm just going to say I'll put the Apple II retroactively. I just nominated the Apple IIe.
Okay,
There it is. I just did
good.
it.
We're also now equal because I threw an
Okay,
extra one in
great.
at the end there.
Apple
But
IIe.
I really I don't. To me, right? I don't think you can say the Apple IIe and then just immediately replace it with the original Macintosh. Like
Yeah.
I I know that there will be people that disagree with that, but I think that would be a wild thing to disagree with. All right. Here's what I'll say. I do want to get specific, right? So for the iPod, we'll start with the iPod. I
Yeah.
would suggest what it was essentially the iPod Video, which became the iPod Classic 5th gen at a certain point. But it's got the larger screen, so it's easier to see. Just a pure click wheel, and it's flat on the front, white acrylic. I think that is like the absolute sweet spot for iconic iPod, in my opinion. The 5th gen is also known as.
Okay. iPod 5th gen white.
Yeah.
Got it. I'm fine with that. Let's do it. That is still the
With
iconic shape
the
and
earbuds. Let's put the
design
earbuds in there too. We've got to get the
with
white earbuds.
white earbuds. Got
Yeah.
it. Okay.
All right. Now, do we want to try and do iPhone?
Sure. Sure. I feel like the iPhone 5, but I don't like the original iPhone mostly because I don't think it's as good as important as a product if we're talking about design. So we're really in the like which one do we want our artist to depict in the statue, right? Which is not the same as what's the most iconic, but it's like how do we want to depict the iPhone? Which iPhone do we choose to depict the importance of the iPhone, right? That's sort of what we're saying here. So iPhone 5 I pick from a purely aesthetic argument.
Yeah. So, all right. So I think realistically, we have three phones to pick from, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have the original iPhone, we have the
Yeah.
iPhone 5, we have the iPhone 10. They are our iPhones to pick from. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think we're picking three different things here, right? We've got recognizability. I think today is probably the iPhone 10. Like
I don't agree because the
realistically for
iPhone 5
most
design,
people.
but the iPhone 5 design comes back with the iPhone 12. The
Yeah,
iPhone
but
10 is the is
but
the
that
cur is the bar of soap design from the
yeah, but I'm
iPhone
thinking
6.
about the home button though. Right now, like physical shape, yeah, they're the iPhone 5, but like if you're depicting the actual phone with some level of detail, the home button, while iconic, is probably not the most recognizable thing today.
Well, yeah, but it's iconic. I mean, that's my argument. Otherwise, I would make the argument because I do not. I mean, I don't want the curvy sides. At that point, I would say, why not? Why isn't it the iPhone 12 Pro?
Yeah.
Right?
But so here's the thing. I know you're
Except for the camera blob on the back, or the iPhone 15
I would say from
non-Pro.
an iconic perspective, the iPhone 5 takes it. But what's the most important iPhone? That's what we're talking about here, right? Like we're building importance in some way, and like,
Well,
can you
yeah,
argue
but
against the original?
I think it's a combination of importance and also sort of like iconic design. And the iPhone, and also, I mean, I could also make the point that the original iPhone didn't, until you got to the iPhone 4, you couldn't even buy it on anything but AT&T in the US. So like the iPod, it actually had a big trajectory. The most important iPod was the original iPod 2, or was the iPod Mini maybe, but we picked the iPod 5th gen. I think what we have to do is say, okay, we're honoring the iPhone, and then it's sort of like which of the designs do we feel is like the best to be represented here. And that's why I wouldn't pick the original iPhone as much as I love it too, because I don't think it's representative. I think it was I think there were better iPhones later. Um, and I'd be fine depicting a modern iPhone here because I do like the flat sided era better than I like the curved era. Uh, yeah,
I think. All right, so we have five spots on this list. Why don't we
yeah.
put two iPhones on this for now, and we can come back and revise
I,
this.
I don't want two
You
iPhones
don't
on the
want to put two
monument.
iPhones?
I don't.
Wow. Okay. And so you would say the iPhone 5, that's the one that you would
I mean,
of everything?
if you don't like the home button as an iconic representation of the iPhone, then then I would propose a modern flat sided iPhone of some sort,
No,
ideally with a
I
slimmed
think the
down
iPhone
camera.
5 is the best possible representation of the history of the iPhone. It has enough elements of classic and modern design that it would work as a if we want to pick an iPhone to represent all iPhones. But I would be happy to compromise on this, but my pick would be the original iPhone. That would be
Hmm.
my just from like a historical perspective. I think the iPod and even to some extent even the Macs, whichever we end up choosing, I think you're fine to pick like what is the overall best representation of this product. But I just think, as we were talking earlier, like the original iPhone was like the most important thing that has ever happened in technology.
Yeah, but in some ways it was, but it really was the original iPhone and the iPhone 3G and the iPhone 3GS and the iPhone 4 and the
Yeah.
iPhone 5. And that's my argument. It's
When
like
really
if
it was probably the App Store, right? Which is not
yeah,
the thing we're
yeah, well
documenting
I
today.
you can't put the original iPhone on here in the 5th gen iPod. I'll put it that way. Like it's either they're
Yeah,
both
fair.
either then we're going all original, and it's the original iPod, the original iPhone, the original Mac, uh, and the original iPad, and then I don't even know what. Then we'll get your Apple Watch edition in there or something. I like, or we say the premise here is that we're going to pick a representative of the product that we like aesthetically, um, because the iPhone 5 is better aesthetically. What's with the fives too? Fifth generation iPod too.
Let's keep going. Let's keep with these two for now,
Okay, all
and
right.
let's keep going because
I was
we're
I
still
was gonna
trying to
say,
work out what this list even is
yeah,
even supposed to
yeah.
show. So
I was gonna say the original Mac and the MacBook Air should go on.
I agree with the MacBook Air for sure.
Well, sure, that was me putting your thing on the list.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with the MacBook Air for sure. But here's my counter. Right? Would you just obviously you've already put it on there, so I feel like I know the answer. But original Mac over iMac G3?
Yeah, yeah.
Why?
I feel like, I mean, okay, to use your iPod and iPhone argument, especially the iPhone argument, it changed everything. It changed everything for Apple. It changed everything for the entire computer industry, the graphical interface. And that shape is iconic. It is the kind of computer that belongs in a museum. So does the G3. It's true. But the original Mac, and it's got personality. It was the boot up icon forever. It represents the Mac in a way that I would say even now that shape, that classic shape, whether it's the original Mac or the SE30 or what or the classic, that shape represents the Mac in a way that the iMac G3 doesn't, even though the iMac G3 is also an iconic and important product.
You feel this is separate to the iPhone debate?
I think so. My feeling is that the Mac has so many varied shapes that it deserves more place in the monument because there are so many different representations of the Mac. But then again, I'm a Mac person, and I remember how important those classic Macs were. And my first Mac was a classic shaped Mac; it was an SE. So for me, I think that whole all in one. I think it goes to fundamentally the computer for the rest of us. The iMac G3 is a 90s take on the 80s classic original Mac
Mm-hmm.
design, right?
But with the iPhone 5, one of your things was it's design wise the closest to what we have
Right.
today. Which
Well,
one out of the Mac and the G3 is closest to what we have today, do you think?
that is not my argument though. Closest to what we have today is not my argument.
Okay,
My
so what
argument
is the
is that
argument
I
for the
like the
5
flat
then?
design better and they brought it back. If they hadn't brought it back and we were still using the curvy bars of soap, I would still
Yeah.
say the iPhone 5
Okay,
because I
so
think it's a
design
better design.
wise, do you prefer the original Mac to the G3?
As a piece of iconic design, I do. Absolutely.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
it
It's
so
it's more compact, it's less bulbous
uh-huh.
and deep and all of those things, and it's kind of adorable. And it's meant to be picked up with a handle. There's a handle on the G3 iMac. Don't pick it up. Like it's very heavy and all that. But this is what I'm saying is the other difference here is all iPods look the same, other than the iPod Touch, which looks like an iPhone. All iPhones look the same. Macs don't look the same. They're very different. And that's why when I'm thinking about depictions, I kind of want to depict some different Macs because they are very different shapes. The iMac G3 does not look like a modern Mac, nor does the original iMac. Neither of them looks like a modern Mac. The MacBook Air has to carry that. The MacBook Air is the representative of that.
I mean it's the Mac. Really, right? The
From 20
laptops
from
are
2010
laptops are the
on,
Mac.
yeah,
Yeah.
the Mac was the original Mac from 84 until 97, and then the iMac was the Mac from 97 until the early 2000s, if not mid 2000s, and then the eventually the MacBook Air became the definitive Mac and
Yeah,
has been
it
for the
took
last
over.
15 years for sure.
So And I'm not arguing. I'm just checking. See, from your perspective, the original Mac passes the same test for the Mac as the iPhone 5 does for the iPhone. Like for the way you're thinking about this, like what is the best
I,
representation of this product?
I feel like I feel like there are the most iconic designs, but I think that the problem with the Mac is that there are so many different shapes of Mac. The Mac, how many shapes of iPhone have there been? You could argue one, right? And then it's all about like the sides being curved or not. But
Mm-hmm.
they're all just rectangular slabs. The 5 is a little taller than the 4. How many shapes of Mac have there been? Dozens, dozens of shapes because computers fundamentally take up more space, don't have to fit in a pocket, all of those things. And so I think the original Mac is an iconic original design, just like, yes, the original iPod kind of ushered that era in. But
Yeah.
I'm willing to go. But that's with the if you talk about the Mac being more refined later, like the iPod was refined in the fifth generation. I'll agree with that, but only so far. Like they made compact all-in-one Macs like the original Mac for a while, and some of them are really awful and ugly, like the Color Classic. But sorry, Color Classic fans, it's awful and
Rough,
ugly.
rough
Um,
times.
the but you could put the Classic in here. It's just a little slightly curvier and slightly flatter. You can put the SE in here. That's got that kind of uh,
I don't like the Mac Color Classic. I don't like the way that looks.
pinstripe design. The Color Classic is bad. The regular Classic looks fine. The first Classic. The SE is a great look, SE 30, and then there's the original. I just kind of feel like there needs to be an original style compact Mac on the list. What model it is actually doesn't matter to me at all. That it's the original is mostly kind of a default because it's a little bit simpler, but it could be a later model too. But I just feel like that shape is
No, no,
important.
no, no. If we're doing this, it's the original. Like, I just think that's
Okay.
the one. I just had a thought. I'm so happy that I am on leave for the follow up for this episode.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be great.
Yeah, I'm happy I don't have to deal with the fallout of
I'll
this
send I'll send it
conversation.
I'll send it all to you.
And I'll just immediately archive it because my
Yeah.
baby will care more about.
Yeah, I'll
I
save
care
it.
more about my baby than the
I'll
original
save it for
Mac.
your first episode back, and then we'll do the follow up.
That might actually be pretty funny if you did that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's look at where we are right now. Right, we have a list of 5 products. We have the iPod 5th gen, the iPhone 5, the original Mac, and the MacBook Air. Right.
Yeah,
So let's. To me, I don't even really feel like I need to argue the MacBook Air at all. I don't think that there is. Like, I just think that that computer is obvious. Like that is an obvious thing to have. Um, what else would we put on here?
well, the iPad,
Yeah,
and you could be taking Apple's oldest continuous product, the Mac, and sort of bisecting its eras into kind of original era and modern era, and then you'd have an iPod, an iPhone, and an iPad.
and I do. Okay, I don't think the Apple Watch is important enough.
I agree. I agree. I my only my so here's the thing. I think the goal here is we're going to showcase these products. If the brief was that it's going to be a person who is using Apple products, that's a different sculpture, right? And that
Yeah,
that one might have a Vision Pro and an Apple Watch, and we'd have to argue about which earbuds go in and all that. But that's not what it is. It's about the products, and I think the Apple Watch is not because at its core, it's just that round direct watch, and like the Ultra is a little more interesting, but I wouldn't do it. I think I would put the iPad on before that.
yeah, it is an accessory. It's an accessory. Like,
And
still,
sorry,
like
sorry, services, you can't be depicted as in art.
it's the chart that just keeps going up, breaks through the
Yeah,
statue, and continues into
yeah,
the sky.
yeah. Services you can't be in the monument. That's not your place. Yeah, yeah. Maybe we could make the monument a service. Maybe you have to become a member to see the monument.
That's fair.
It's called Moss, Monument as a Service.
I know you don't like the original argument, but I think I think I would want the original iPad on this
I'm fine
list.
with that.
over the M4 iPad Pro. The
I'm fine
M4
with that.
iPad Pro is like the perfection, but like
Mm.
it, the original iPad I think would maybe look better here. Um,
Sure,
hmm.
I'm okay with that.
So things that we're leaving out, stuff like the Vision Pro, the Apple Pencil, AirPods are not on here, which I'm fine with. The iPod Mini didn't make it, and no Apple Watch made it. I think I feel pretty good about this list.
Yeah, I should specify because we've been arguing the point.
Yeah.
I would depict the unibody tapered 2010 MacBook Air,
Yes.
not the one with the fold down door, which
Correct.
is
Yeah.
not tapered and weird, and one of its cores shut down when it was room temperature, and not you
My
weren't in a meat
brother,
locker.
my brother got a skin burn from that MacBook Air
Mm-hmm.
on his leg.
It's not great.
I think he was playing a video game.
Yeah. Uh huh.
That
That would do it.
he
Little
had
bug
that
something like
Mac
that. Little CG
replaced out
3D
twice
thing.
on AppleCare because it
Yeah.
just
It was a
kept
mess.
dying. Yeah,
It
that
was a
was a
mess.
rough computer.
I've told you my story before. I was facing Windows at Macworld at that
Yeah,
point, and in the afternoon, the sun would shine in my office, and it would get warmer, and the MacBook Air would just stop working because it would shut down one of its two cores, and it would get all
yeah.
janky and jerky and all that, and I literally couldn't use it because it was too hot in my office. But worked great in a meat
What's
locker.
what's kind of incredible is like the original MacBook Air wedge shape, terrible first version, then became the
Well, no,
MacBook
the first
Air.
version wasn't a wedge. The first version wasn't a wedge. It was the second version. That was the one I remember going to the event. It was at
Yes,
Town Hall, and they came out
yes,
with the 11 and the
yes.
13,
Yep,
and it was the unibody wedge. And I was like,
yep,
oh, they took the MacBook Air, which was I loved the original MacBook Air design because it was so light, but it was just not a good computer. And I remember walking out of that Town Hall briefing and thinking, oh, they got it now. And they
yeah. It
boy
wasn't
did
a
they.
wedge, but it was kind of roundy and silver. Like they look
Sure.
similar, right? But the point
Oh
that I
yeah.
was going to make is like the original MacBook Air became the MacBook Air, and then the 12-inch MacBook became the new MacBook Air. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it took another go, and they like could make these computers that were flawed in some way. They needed something to happen to make them work.
Yeah.
Um, I think I feel pretty good about this. This is the iPod 5th gen, the iPhone 5, the
So
original Mac.
and we'll mention the accessories. iPod 5th gen
Yeah,
with earbuds,
yep,
the iPhone 5, the original Mac with the mouse, and you can put the keyboard in there too, but it's all part of it. But I want that mouse in there. The 2010 MacBook Air and the original iPad.
as our monument of the most. So this will say underneath it on a little plaque, the most important Apple products, and maybe say like mixed media or something,
Mm.
because
Hmm.
it's the way that the sculpture's being put together.
Maybe. I don't even know about most important. It might just be like we may just let the audience decide what the meaning of this is. Now that we've
Well, this has to be called something, like the chapter, for example. It needs a name, and we have been calling it most important for this
Mhm.
entire episode. Jason, we got to live or die by the sword. You know what I mean? Like we have to call it something, and we're calling it this, and then we'll just have to deal with it. I feel good calling this the,
Okay.
the most important Apple products. Honestly,
All right.
like I feel
Sure.
good about it.
It'll
I
get
feel
a
good about
colloquial
it.
name anyway, and they won't call it that. They'll call it whatever they
Yeah.
call it.
My
Let the
my
people decide.
I think we both maybe would have an asterisk on this list, and maybe yours would be the iPod and mine would be the iPhone. Where I think maybe without the other one, we probably would have put a different
Mm.
product on here, right? Like I think I would put the original iPhone, and I think you maybe put the original iPod.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think these are good compromises for good reasons as to why we went with
Sure.
the 5th gen for both.
Yeah, I
Incredible.
think so.
Take us home,
Well,
Jason
that's it.
Snell. You're the host of
We
this
did it.
show. I've really enjoyed being a
No, you
guest.
you you got to do it. You gotta do it. to
All
take
right.
us home, because you can promise things that I'll have to deliver. That's the
That's
beauty
a
of it.
great point. If you would like to send us in your feedback, your follow up, your questions, your suggestions, the places that we got this wrong, if you would like to make this out of clay and send us an
Impossible.
image, go to upgradefeedback.com and you can do all of that. I want to thank our members who support us every week of Upgrade Plus. I'd like to give an additional thank you to our members because you continue to support me while I'm on paternity leave. So thank you so much. I have a couple of other products that I want to mention, and we're going to do that in Upgrade Plus today. You can go to getupgradeplus.com. You get longer ad-free episodes each and every week. You can find us on YouTube by searching for Upgrade Podcast. You can watch us with our hands on our faces for this entire episode as we try and make the decisions that we're making. I want to thank our sponsors for helping make this episode possible. But most of all, thank you for listening. And Jason, thank you for holding the show while I'm away caring for my child.
All right. Say goodbye, Myke Hurley.
Goodbye, Myke Hurley.
What?